The thunder cracked as if the heavens themselves were splitting apart the evening Tessa Lawrence arrived in Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, in the autumn of 1885. Her gloved hands trembled as she stepped off the stagecoach into the dusty main street, the hem of her navy traveling dress instantly muddied by the rain-soaked earth. "Welcome to nowhere, madam," the stagecoach driver chuckled, tossing down her weathered trunk. "You sure this is where you want to be?" Tessa glanced around at the small frontier town, a single muddy street lined with wooden buildings, the saloon's piano music drifting through the rain. This place was nothing like Boston, but that was precisely the point. Her father was 6 months dead, her inheritance squandered by his gambling debts, and the teaching position at Redemption Creek's newly established schoolhouse was her last chance at independence. "Yes," she said firmly, lifting her chin despite the rain pelting her face. "This is exactly where I need to be." A horse whinnied nearby, drawing her attention to a tall figure standing beneath the overhang of the general store. Even from a distance, she could see he was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His face was partially obscured by the brim of his worn cowboy hat, but there was something in his stance, a stillness that seemed almost unnatural that made him impossible to ignore. "That'd be Garrett Blackwood," the driver said, following her gaze. "Owns the largest cattle spread outside town. Don't mind him, he doesn't talk much to anybody these days." As if hearing his name, the man touched the brim of his hat in a subtle greeting before turning and disappearing around the corner of the building, leaving Tessa with a strange, unsettled feeling in her chest. "The schoolhouse is that way, madam." The driver pointed down the street. "Mrs. Wilson at the boarding house is expecting you." Tessa gathered her courage along with her soggy skirts and headed toward her new life, unaware that the silent cowboy had paused at the corner, watching her go with eyes that held years of unspoken longing. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the mud already beginning to dry in the harsh Arizona sun as Tessa made her way to the schoolhouse. Mrs. Wilson, a plump widow with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, had shown her to a modest room the night before and provided her with a surprisingly decent meal and a map of the small town. "You'll want to meet with Mayor Thompson first thing," Mrs. Wilson had instructed. "He's quite proud of bringing a proper educated lady teacher from back east. The children have been learning from whoever had the time, mostly Pastor Mitchell's wife, but they need structure." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple whitewashed building with a bell tower that seemed overly ambitious for its modest size. As Tessa approached, she noticed a horse tied to the hitching post outside, a magnificent chestnut stallion that stood at least 17 hands high. When she pushed open the door, she found a man kneeling by the pot-bellied stove in the corner, arranging kindling. His broad shoulders strained against his worn denim shirt as he worked, and when he turned at the sound of her entrance, Tessa recognized the cowboy from the previous evening. Up close, Garrett Blackwood was even more imposing. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines etched around eyes the color of a summer storm. A scar ran along his jawline, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. He couldn't have been more than 35, but there was an age in his eyes that went beyond years. "Mr. Blackwood, isn't it?" Tessa said, striving for a professional tone despite her racing heart. There was something about him that unsettled her, not fear, exactly, but awareness. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on his jeans before touching the brim of his hat. "Madam," his voice was deep and rough as if rarely used. "Heard the new teacher was arriving. Thought I'd make sure the place was warm for the children." The simple kindness took her by surprise. "That's very thoughtful of you." His eyes held hers for a moment too long before he looked away. "Town's been waiting a long time for a proper teacher." "Have you lived here long, Mr. Blackwood?" "All my life." He moved toward the door, as if eager to escape further conversation. "My ranch is about 5 miles north." I've got 3 children who'll be in your school. That surprised her even more. You're married then? A shadow passed over his face. Widowed. 5 years now. My sister helps with the young ones. I'm sorry for your loss, Tessa said softly. He nodded once, sharply, then paused at the door. Town meeting tonight at the church. 7 o'clock. Folks are eager to meet you. Without waiting for a response, he was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of leather and pine. Tessa spent the day organizing the schoolroom, arranging the meager supply of books, and preparing lessons. By the time she walked to the church that evening, most of the town had already gathered inside the small wooden building. Mayor Thompson, a portly man with ambitious whiskers and an even more ambitious opinion of himself, made a grand show of introducing her to everyone. Tessa smiled and nodded, trying to remember names and faces. The blacksmith and his pregnant wife, the saloon owner with his carefully waxed mustache, the general store proprietor and his 5 daughters, and dozens of others who blended together in a whirl of handshakes and curious stares. She was conscious of Garrett Blackwood standing at the back of the room, a tall, silent presence amid the chatter. 3 children stayed close to him, a boy of about 12 with his father's serious eyes, a girl of perhaps 10 with copper-colored braids, and a small boy no more than 6 who clung to his father's leg while staring openly at Tessa. Miss Lawrence will begin classes on Monday, the mayor announced, and we expect all school-age children to attend regularly. This town is growing, and we need educated young people to help it prosper. After the meeting, as Tessa was speaking with several mothers about the school schedule, she felt a tug on her skirt. Looking down, she found Garrett Blackwood's youngest son staring up at her with solemn eyes. "Are you really from the big city?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Tessa knelt to his level, smiling. "I am. From Boston. That's very far east of here. Pa says you know about books and numbers and such." "I do indeed. And what's your name?" "Samuel," he said proudly. "But everybody calls me Sam. I'm 6. He held up the appropriate number of fingers. "Pa says I can learn to read this year." "And so you shall," Tessa promised. A shadow fell over them, and she looked up to find Garrett watching them, his expression unreadable. "Time to go, Sam," he said quietly. Sam nodded but hesitated. "Miss Lawrence is going to teach me to read, Pa." Something flickered in Garrett's eyes, a softness that transformed his stern features for just a moment. "That's why she's here, son." He looked at Tessa. "Thank you for coming to Redemption Creek, Miss Lawrence. It means a lot to the children." The sincerity in his voice touched her. "I'm looking forward to teaching them, Mr. Blackwood." As the Blackwood family left the church, Tessa couldn't help but watch them go, the tall, solitary man with his 3 children walking through the dusty street toward their waiting wagon. There was something about Garrett Blackwood that intrigued her, a depth of feeling beneath his reserved exterior that made her wonder what sorrows he carried. The first week of school passed in a blur of activity. Tessa had 27 students ranging from 5 to 16 years of age, with vastly different levels of education. Some could barely write their names, while others, like Garrett's oldest son Thomas, showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics and literature. Each morning, she watched the Blackwood children arrive in their wagon, sometimes driven by a young woman she assumed was Garrett's sister, other times by Garrett himself. He never lingered, merely tipping his hat in greeting before turning the wagon and heading back toward his ranch. On Friday afternoon, as the children were being dismissed, a commotion outside drew Tessa to the doorway. A group of men on horseback had ridden into town, their manner loud and aggressive as they dismounted in front of the saloon. "Trouble?" Thomas Blackwood murmured, appearing at her side. At 12, he already had the serious demeanor of his father, with the same storm-gray eyes. "Those are Caldwell's men." They've been feuding with Pa for years over water rights. Your father mentioned no feud to me, Tessa said, concerned by the boy's evident worry. Pa doesn't talk about it much, but it's why he's been teaching us to shoot since we were little. Just in case. Thomas's matter-of-fact tone chilled her. Thomas, such matters are not for children to concern themselves with, she admonished gently. Now, gather your brother and sister. I'll walk you to your wagon. No need, Miss Lawrence, came Garrett's deep voice from behind them. He stood in the schoolyard, his posture tense as he watched the men across the street. I came to fetch them myself today. There was a hard set to his jaw that hadn't been there before, and Tessa noticed he wore a gun belt, the revolver holstered at his hip looking well used and well cared for. Mr. Blackwood? She acknowledged, trying to keep her voice calm for the children's sake. Your son Thomas has been excelling in his studies. He has quite a mind for figures. Garrett's eyes softened as he looked at his son. Gets that from his mother. She was clever with numbers. He placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Go get Sam and Emma. We need to head home. As Thomas went to collect his siblings, Garrett turned to Tessa. Miss Lawrence, it might be best if you stayed close to town this weekend. There's been some trouble with rustlers, and tensions are running high. Are you in danger, Mr. Blackwood? She asked directly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Most days, Miss Lawrence. His eyes held hers. But I appreciate your concern. Before she could respond, a shout came from across the street. One of the men from the saloon was pointing in their direction. His words slurred but aggressive. Blackwood, still hiding behind women and children. Garrett's entire body tensed, but he didn't turn around. Get inside, Miss Lawrence, he said quietly. This isn't something you should witness. I will do no such thing, Tessa replied, her Boston backbone asserting itself. There are children present, and I will not allow violence in their presence. To her surprise, Garrett's expression softened, and something like admiration flickered in his eyes. Then stay with my children, please. He strode across the street with purpose, his hand never straying to his weapon as he approached the drunk cowboy. Tessa couldn't hear the words exchanged, but she saw Garrett's calm demeanor in stark contrast to the other man's agitated gestures. After a tense moment, the sheriff appeared, and the confrontation ended with the drunk being led away toward the jailhouse. When Garrett returned, the children were already loaded in the wagon. Thank you, he said simply to Tessa. For what exactly? She asked. For caring about their safety. He glanced at his children. Not everyone would. They're my students, Mr. Blackwood. He studied her face for a long moment. You're not what I expected, Miss Lawrence. And what did you expect? Someone who wouldn't last a month in Redemption Creek. He climbed onto the wagon seat. I'm glad to be wrong. As the wagon pulled away, Tessa realized her heart was beating faster than normal, and not entirely from the tension of the near confrontation. The weeks passed, settling into a rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Tessa found herself looking forward to the moments when Garrett would bring his children to school, their brief exchanges becoming less formal, more comfortable. Sometimes he would ask about their progress, other times simply comment on the weather or town happenings. One cold November afternoon, Tessa was walking back to the boarding house when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Turning, she saw Garrett approaching on his chestnut stallion. Miss Lawrence, he called, slowing the horse to a walk beside her. May I escort you home? It'll be dark soon. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood, but it's only a short walk. He frowned slightly. There's been more trouble with rustlers. 3 of my cattle were taken last night. Concern creased her brow. That's terrible. Has the sheriff? Sheriff Hollister does what he can. But his jurisdiction is limited. Most of the trouble happens outside town limits. He paused. The children mentioned you're planning a Christmas pageant. The sudden change of subject startled her. Yes, we're working on it now. All the students will participate. Something like hesitation crossed his face. Emma hasn't stopped talking about it. She's to be an angel, she says. Tessa smiled, thinking of the serious-faced girl who had slowly blossomed in her class. She has a lovely singing voice. I've given her a solo. Her mother sang beautifully, Garrett said softly. Mary used to sing the children to sleep every night. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late wife by name, and Tessa felt honored by this small confidence. The children speak of her sometimes. They loved her very much. Yes. His voice was rough with emotion. After a moment, he seemed to collect himself. The reason I stopped you, I was wondering if you might need help with the pageant. Building sets or such. I'm handy with tools. The offer touched her. That would be wonderful, Mr. Blackwood. We could certainly use your assistance. He nodded, seemingly relieved. Good. That's good. I'll come by the schoolhouse tomorrow afternoon, if that suits. It suits perfectly. As promised, Garrett arrived the next day after classes had ended, tools in hand. Tessa had sketched out simple designs for the stable scene, and together they began measuring and cutting the lumber he had brought. As they worked, Tessa found herself fascinated by his hands, large and calloused, but surprisingly deft as they shaped the wood. Occasionally their fingers would brush as they held a piece steady, and each touch sent an unexpected warmth through her. How did you come to Redemption Creek? Garrett asked as they paused for a cup of coffee she had brewed on the schoolroom stove. It's a long way from Boston. Tessa hesitated, then decided on honesty. My father died in debt. Our home was sold to pay his creditors, and I needed to support myself. This position was available, and I've always wanted to teach. I'm sorry about your father, he said quietly. Thank you. He was a good man in many ways, but he had weaknesses. She sipped her coffee. What about you? You mentioned you've lived here all your life. Garrett nodded. My father settled this land in '55, before the territory was even organized. Built the ranch from nothing. Pride tinged his voice. I was born in the ranch house. So were all my children. And your wife? Tessa asked gently. Was she from here as well? A shadow crossed his face. No. Mary came from Missouri with her family when she was 16. We married a year later. He stared into his coffee. She died bringing Sam into the world. I'm so sorry, Garrett, Tessa said, using his first name without thinking. He looked up at her use of his name, something shifting in his expression. It was a long time ago. His voice softened. But the children need a mother. I see that more clearly now, watching them with you. Before Tessa could respond to this unexpected statement, the schoolhouse door opened, and Mayor Thompson bustled in, his eyebrows rising at the sight of them sitting together. Miss Lawrence, Blackwood, he exclaimed, glancing between them. I didn't expect to find you here. Mr. Blackwood is helping with the Christmas pageant sets, Tessa explained, rising to her feet. We were just taking a short break. I see, the mayor said, his tone suggesting he saw more than was actually there. Well, I came to inform you that the town council has approved funds for new books for the school. Quite generous, if I do say so myself. That's wonderful news, Tessa said sincerely. Yes, well, we value education in Redemption Creek, Thompson preened. He cast a sidelong glance at Garrett. Some more than others, of course. Garrett's expression hardened. Meaning what, exactly? The mayor waved a dismissive hand. Nothing. Just that some folks are more involved in town affairs than others who prefer to keep to themselves. My taxes pay for this school same as anyone's, Garrett said evenly. And my children attend regularly. Of course, Thompson backpedaled. No offense meant, Blackwood. Now, Miss Lawrence, if I might have a word with you in private about the book order. After the mayor left with her list of requested books, Tessa returned to find Garrett preparing to leave. I should get back to the ranch, he said, his earlier openness gone. I'll continue with the sets tomorrow. Garrett, she said, catching his arm as he turned to go. Don't let Mayor Thompson bother you. He's pompous, but harmless. His eyes searched hers. It's not just him. There are those in town who still blame me for Mary's death, who think I should have gotten the doctor sooner, or taken her to Tucson where there was a proper hospital. That's ridiculous, Tessa said firmly. Childbirth can be dangerous even with the best medical care. I know that. Now. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. But for a long time I blamed myself too. The admission seemed to cost him, and Tessa's heart ached for the guilt he had carried. Your children are wonderful, Garrett. You've done a remarkable job raising them alone. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. They're the reason I get up each morning. He gently removed her hand from his arm, but held it for a moment longer than necessary. Thank you, Tessa. It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice stayed with her long after he had gone. The next few weeks saw Garrett at the schoolhouse almost daily, working on the pageant sets after classes ended. Sometimes his sister Charlotte would bring the children to town and take them home while he stayed to work. Other times they would help with simple tasks before heading back to the ranch. Tessa found herself looking forward to these afternoons more than she cared to admit. Garrett was still a man of few words, but the silence between them had become comfortable, even companionable. Occasionally he would tell her stories about the early days of the territory, or about his children's antics when they were younger. She, in turn, shared memories of Boston and her dreams of creating a true center of learning in Redemption Creek. You should come to the ranch for Christmas dinner, he said one afternoon in mid-December as they put the finishing touches on the stable. The children would like it. Charlotte too. The invitation caught Tessa by surprise. Are you certain? I wouldn't want to intrude on family time. You wouldn't be intruding. He focused intently on the piece of wood he was sanding. It would mean a lot to them, to all of us. Then I would be honored, she said softly. He looked up, a rare smile transforming his face. Good. That's good. The night of the Christmas pageant arrived, bringing most of the town to the schoolhouse despite the bitter cold. The children performed admirably, with Emma Blackwood's clear, sweet voice bringing tears to more than one parent's eyes during her solo of Silent Night. Afterward, as the families mingled and enjoyed the refreshments provided by the town's ladies, Tessa found herself standing beside Garrett, watching as Sam proudly showed off the simple shepherd's costume she had helped him make. He's growing up so fast, Garrett murmured. All of them are. They're wonderful children, Tessa said. You should be very proud. I am. He glanced down at her. Thank you for being so good with them, especially Thomas. He's been different since you came more interested in his studies, talking about maybe becoming an engineer someday. He has the mind for it, Tessa assured him. With proper schooling, he could attend a university back east. Garrett was silent for a moment. His mother would have wanted that for him. She always said our children would have more opportunities than we did. Before Tessa could respond, a commotion at the door drew their attention. A man staggered in, his coat covered in snow and blood. Sheriff, he gasped. Sheriff Hollister. Caldwell's men are burning the Blackwood ranch. The room erupted in chaos. Garrett was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the door, his face a mask of fury and fear. Charlotte. He called over his shoulder to his sister. Get the children to the hotel. Stay there until I come for you. Tessa caught up to him outside as he was untying his horse. "Garrett, wait!" He turned, his eyes wild. "My home is burning, Tessa. My men could be hurt or worse." "I know," she said, gripping his arm. "But you can't go alone. Let the sheriff organize a party. There's no time." He swung up into the saddle, then looked down at her, his expression softening slightly. "I'll be careful, but I have to go now." "I'll stay with your children," she promised. "Just come back safely." He nodded once, sharply, then spurred his horse down the snowy street, followed moments later by the sheriff and several other men from town. The night stretched endlessly as Tessa waited at the hotel with Charlotte and the children. Sam eventually fell asleep on her lap, while Emma curled against her side, trembling occasionally with suppressed tears. Thomas sat straight-backed in a chair by the window, watching the road with his father's intensity. It was nearly dawn when hoofbeats sounded outside. Thomas was at the door before anyone could stop him, throwing it open to reveal Garrett dismounting from his horse, his face smudged with soot but otherwise unharmed. "Pa!" Thomas's voice broke as he launched himself at his father. Garrett caught him in a fierce embrace, then reached for Emma and Sam as they ran to him. Charlotte stood back, tears streaming down her face as she watched the reunion. "The ranch?" she asked when Garrett finally looked up. "The main house is standing. We lost the north barn and some fencing. 2 hands were hurt, but they'll recover." His voice was tight with controlled rage. "Caldwell will answer for this." "But not tonight," Tessa said firmly, stepping forward. "Tonight you need rest and to be with your family." Garrett's eyes met hers over his children's heads, and something in his expression made her heart stutter. "Yes," he said softly, "that's exactly what I need." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, the snow sparkling like diamonds in the morning sun as Tessa made her way to the Blackwood ranch. The damage from the fire was evident, the charred remains of the barn stark against the white landscape, but the main house stood solid and welcoming, smoke curling from its chimney. Charlotte greeted her at the door, her resemblance to her brother striking in the daylight. "Tessa, I'm so glad you came. The children have been watching the road for an hour." Inside, the house was warm and filled with delicious smells. Sam and Emma immediately pulled her into the parlor to show her the gifts they had received, books for both of them, a doll for Emma, and a carved wooden horse for Sam. "Pa made them," Sam said proudly. "He makes the best horses." Thomas appeared from the kitchen, more relaxed than Tessa had ever seen him. "Miss Lawrence, Merry Christmas. Pa's just finishing up the dinner." Garrett emerged moments later, and Tessa was struck by how different he looked in his home. His usual severity softened, a hint of a smile playing around his mouth as he watched his children's excitement. "Merry Christmas, Tessa," he said, crossing the room to take her hand. "I'm glad you came." "Merry Christmas, Garrett." She squeezed his hand. "Your home is beautiful." "It was Mary's pride," he said quietly. "She designed most of it." The dinner was a joyful affair, with more laughter than Tessa had ever heard from the Blackwood family. Charlotte was a gracious hostess. The children were on their best behavior, and Garrett seemed to relax more with each passing hour. After the meal, as Charlotte supervised the children in a game of checkers, Garrett invited Tessa to see the ranch. They bundled up against the cold and stepped outside, walking slowly toward a rise that overlooked the property. "It's breathtaking," Tessa said honestly, gazing out at the vast expanse of snow-covered pasture, the distant mountains purple against the sky. "It is," Garrett agreed, but when she turned, she found him looking at her instead of the view. "Tessa, I need to say something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When I thought I might lose the ranch, lose everything I've built for my children, I realized something." He took a deep breath. "The only thing I truly feared losing that night was the chance to tell you how I feel." Garrett, please let me finish. He took her gloved hands in his. I haven't felt this way since Mary died. I didn't think I could. Or should. His eyes searched hers. But watching you with my children, seeing how you've brought light back into their lives, into my life, I can't ignore it anymore. Tessa felt tears pricking at her eyes. I've come to care for you all very deeply, she admitted. More than I should, perhaps. Why more than you should? Because I'm their teacher. Because the town would talk. Let them talk, he said fiercely. I've lived my whole life in this place, and I've never once cared what they thought of me. He stepped closer. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Then you should know that I think you're the finest man I've ever known, Tessa said softly, and that I've been falling in love with you a little more each day. The words seemed to strike him physically. His eyes widened, and for a moment he stood perfectly still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Tessa, he whispered finally, her name a prayer on his lips. When he leaned down to kiss her, she met him halfway, her heart pounding as their lips touched. It was a gentle kiss, tentative at first, then deepening as he pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, Tessa was startled to see tears glistening in his eyes. Garrett? She whispered, concerned. He didn't try to hide the tears, letting them fall freely as he looked at her with wonder. It's been so long, he said, his voice rough with emotion. So long since I've felt anything but duty and responsibility. I thought that part of me died with Mary. Tessa reached up to brush away a tear with her thumb. And now I feel alive again. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Because of you. Instead of laughing with joy as she might have expected, he continued to cry silently, the tears seeming to release years of pent-up grief and loneliness. Tessa held him close, her own eyes damp as she realized the magnitude of what was happening between them. I never thought I'd find love again, he confessed against her hair. Never thought I deserved it after failing Mary. You didn't fail her, Tessa said firmly, and she would want you to be happy, to love again. He nodded slowly. I know that now. He drew back to look at her, his eyes red but clear. I love you, Tessa Lawrence. I think I've loved you since the day you stood up to that drunk to protect my children. I love you too, Garrett Blackwood, she whispered back. With all my heart. They returned to the house hand in hand, their feelings obvious enough that Charlotte gave her brother a knowing smile, while the children exchanged confused but not unhappy glances. As winter turned to spring, Tessa continued teaching while spending most of her free time at the Blackwood ranch. The town gossiped, of course, but most people seemed genuinely happy to see Garrett emerging from his long isolation. Even Mayor Thompson eventually offered his grudging approval, especially after Garrett agreed to serve on the town council. The trouble with Caldwell didn't disappear overnight, but with the sheriff's increased vigilance and support from other ranchers in the area, the feud gradually lost its intensity. By March, Garrett was able to focus fully on rebuilding what had been destroyed and planning for the future, a future that increasingly included Tessa. It was on a warm evening in late April, with the desert blooming around them, that Garrett asked Tessa to marry him. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a single pearl. It was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it. It's beautiful, Tessa breathed, tears springing to her eyes. Not half as beautiful as you. He took her hand. Tessa Lawrence, will you marry me? Will you be a mother to my children and grow old with me on this land? Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes to all of it. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, the front door creaked open, and 3 faces peered out at them. Did she say yes, Pa? Sam asked loudly, making both adults laugh. She did, son, Garrett confirmed, his eyes never leaving Tessa's face. Does this mean we have to call you Ma now? Emma asked Tessa directly, her expression serious. Tessa's heart swelled with love for these children who had become so dear to her. Only if you want to, Emma. You can call me Tessa for as long as you like. Emma seemed to consider this, then nodded decisively. I think I'd like to call you Ma. My friends at school all have Mas, and I remember ours a little, but not much anymore. Tessa opened her arms, and Emma came to her for a hug. Sam followed immediately, while Thomas hung back, watching with his father's thoughtful gaze. Thomas, Tessa asked gently, are you all right with this? The boy straightened his shoulders. Yes, madam. Pa's been happier since you came than I can ever remember him being. And you're a good teacher. He paused. I'd be proud to call you Mother, if that's acceptable. Garrett's arm tightened around Tessa's shoulders as she smiled through her tears at the boy. That would be more than acceptable, Thomas. It would be an honor. They were married in June in the town church, with what seemed like all of Redemption Creek in attendance. Charlotte stood as Tessa's matron of honor, while Thomas proudly stood beside his father as best man. Emma scattered wildflowers down the aisle, and Sam carried the rings on a small cushion Tessa had embroidered for the occasion. As Tessa walked toward Garrett, radiant in a gown of ivory silk, she saw tears glistening in his eyes once again. But this time they were accompanied by a smile so full of joy and love that it transformed his face completely. You're crying again, she whispered when she reached him. Happy tears, he assured her, taking her hands in his. I'll probably cry every day for the rest of our lives, just looking at you and remembering how blessed I am. Then I'll remind you every day how blessed I am too, she promised. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers outside the church, Sheriff Hollister approached them with a telegram in hand. Sorry to interrupt, Blackwood, but this just came for you. Marked urgent. Garrett read the message, his expression growing serious before breaking into a wide smile. It's from the territorial governor, he told Tessa. Caldwell has been arrested in Tucson for land fraud. The water rights dispute is to be settled by an independent commission. He shook his head in wonder. It's over. After all these years, it's finally over. A wedding gift from fate, Tessa said, squeezing his hand. No, Garrett corrected, drawing her close. You are my gift. Everything else is just details. As summer ripened into fall, Tessa continued teaching while settling into life as Mrs. Blackwood. The children thrived under the new arrangement, and even Charlotte seemed rejuvenated, speaking of perhaps pursuing her own interests now that Tessa was there to help with the household. Garrett worked tirelessly on the ranch, but always made time for his family, often joining Tessa on the porch in the evenings to help grade papers or listen to the children read aloud. The shadows that had haunted his eyes when they first met gradually faded, replaced by a contentment that deepened with each passing day. One evening in late September, as they sat together watching the stars emerge, Tessa placed Garrett's hand on her still flat stomach. I have some news, she said softly. His eyes widened as he understood her meaning. Tessa, are you certain? She nodded, watching his face carefully. Dr. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday. We're having a baby, Garrett. For a moment, he was utterly still, and she saw a flicker of the old fear in his eyes. Then he drew her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious glass. I'm afraid, he admitted against her hair. After what happened with Mary, I know, she soothed. But Dr. Mitchell says I'm in excellent health, and he'll be vigilant. This isn't the same situation, Garrett. He nodded, taking a deep breath. You're right, and I won't let fear rob us of this joy. He placed a gentle hand on her stomach. A baby. Our baby. Are you happy? She asked, needing to hear it. In answer, he kissed her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. Happier than I ever dreamed possible, he whispered against her lips. You've given me back my life, Tessa, and now you're giving me a new life to cherish. When they told the children the next morning, their reactions were everything Tessa could have hoped for. Emma was ecstatic at the prospect of a baby brother or sister. Sam was full of questions about how babies worked, and Thomas, in his serious way, promised to help Tessa with anything she needed during her confinement. You're truly all right with this? Garrett asked his oldest son later, when they were alone checking the fences. Thomas considered the question with his usual thoughtfulness. I am. Pa, Tessa, mother makes you happy. Makes all of us happy. And a baby is a blessing, like Pastor Mitchell says. Garrett studied his son, seeing the young man he was becoming. You remind me so much of your mother sometimes. She had that same way of thinking things through. Do you still miss her? Thomas asked quietly. I'll always miss her, Garrett said honestly. She was my first love and she gave me you three. But loving Tessa doesn't diminish what I felt for your mother. It honors it. Thomas nodded, seeming to understand. I think Mother would have liked Tessa. I think so too, son, Garrett said, his heart full. I truly think so too. As Tessa's pregnancy progressed, the entire community rallied around the Blackwoods. The women of the town organized a quilting bee to make blankets for the baby, while the men helped Garrett build an addition to the house for the nursery. Mayor Thompson, in an unexpected gesture of goodwill, arranged for a proper substitute teacher to take over Tessa's duties in the spring. Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-November. Tessa, now showing visibly, found herself cocooned in the warmth of the Blackwood home, surrounded by love and attention from every direction. Charlotte taught her to knit baby clothes, Emma read to her from the new books that had finally arrived for the school, and Sam appointed himself her personal guardian, following her around to make sure she didn't trip or strain herself. Garrett was the most attentive of all, insisting she rest frequently and bringing her small gifts, almost daily wildflowers he found sheltered in a rocky crevice, a piece of quartz that caught the light just so, a book of poetry he'd ordered from back east. Each night, he would lie beside her with his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the movements of their child. I never thought I could be this happy again, he confessed one night as they lay together in the darkness. After Mary died, I closed myself off from everything but duty to the ranch and the children. I thought that was all I deserved. And now? Tessa asked, placing her hand over his where it rested on her stomach. Now I understand that love isn't something you earn or deserve. It's a gift, freely given. He kissed her softly. And I am so grateful for your gift, Tessa. On a crisp spring morning in April 1887, Tessa gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Mary Blackwood. The labor was long but uncomplicated, and when Dr. Mitchell placed the squalling infant in Garrett's arms, the look of wonder and relief on his face brought tears to everyone's eyes. She's perfect, he whispered, carefully bringing the baby to Tessa. Just like her mother. The following years brought a contentment to the Blackwood ranch that seemed to touch everyone associated with it. Tessa returned to teaching once Grace was old enough, bringing her daughter with her to the schoolhouse each day. Garrett expanded the ranch operations, with Thomas increasingly taking on responsibilities as he grew into manhood. In 1889, their family grew again with the birth of a son they named James, a sturdy, happy baby who was the spitting image of his father. By then, Thomas was 17 and preparing to attend university in California, a prospect that filled Garrett with both pride and trepidation. Are you sure you want to go so far? He asked his son as they sat on the porch one evening, watching the younger children play in the yard. Thomas nodded. I want to study engineering, Pa. And the school in Berkeley is the best. He glanced at his father. But I'll come back. This is home. It always will be. Garrett clasped his son's shoulder. Your mother would be so proud of you, Thomas. I know I am. When Thomas left for university that fall, the entire family traveled to Tucson to see him off on the train. As they watched the train disappear into the distance, Tessa slipped her arm through Garrett's. He'll be fine, she assured him. You've raised him to be strong and capable. We've raised him, Garrett corrected, kissing the top of her head. I couldn't have done it without you, Tessa. She smiled up at him, her heart still skipping a beat at the love in his eyes after all these years. We've done well together, haven't we? Better than I ever dreamed possible, he agreed, gathering Emma, Sam, Grace, and little James close as they turned toward home. And we're just getting started. By 1895, Redemption Creek had grown into a proper town with a bank, a doctor's office, and even a small library that Tessa had been instrumental in establishing. The Blackwood Ranch had prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. Thomas had returned from university with his engineering degree and a young wife named Sarah, building a house of their own on the northern edge of the ranch property. On the 10th anniversary of their first meeting, Garrett surprised Tessa with a trip to San Francisco, their first real vacation away from the ranch. As they stood on the deck of the ferry crossing the bay, Garrett wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Happy? He asked softly. Tessa leaned back against him, watching the city grow larger on the horizon. Completely. You. More than I have words to express. He turned her in his arms to face him. Do you ever regret it? Coming to Redemption Creek? Marrying a broken-down cowboy with 3 half-wild children? She laughed, framing his face with her hands. You were never broken, Garrett Blackwood. You were just waiting. Waiting for someone to remind you how to live again. She kissed him softly. And I have never, not for one moment, regretted finding you. He pulled her close, his eyes bright with tears just as they had been the first time he kissed her. I waited years to kiss you, Tessa Lawrence, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making up for all that lost time. Then you'd better get started, she whispered against his lips. As the ferry carried them toward their future, Garrett held her close, grateful beyond measure for the Boston schoolteacher who had brought light back into his world and taught him that even the most wounded heart could learn to love again.